Welcome back. So as we continue our discussion on obesity, we're now focusing on the emotional and psychological triggers, including stress, trauma, and of course, emotional eating. Clinical psychologist Rafiq Lockhat joins us now to share practical coping strategies, mindfulness techniques, and of course, behavior change tips to help us take control of our health. Good afternoon to you, Rafiq. How are you?
Fine, very well, thank you.
Now, so oftentimes when we talk about obesity, we talk about it from the physical perspective, right?
Yes.
But what are some of the psychological triggers that come into play that relate to obesity?
A large part is the psychological aspects are forgotten because we're focusing on the physical, the eating, the exercise, right? And we're not really understanding that the brain controls everything. Okay, so nobody likes being obese. Let's just put that up front. Nobody says, oh, look at me, I love this. And nobody enjoys being that weight and walking around dragging themselves. So when that happens, always now you think something else is going on because it doesn't make logical sense that somebody would eat like that to maintain that kind of weight and be unhealthy on purpose.
Yeah.
Right, so we need new kinds of thinking, and these days, thankfully, neuroscience has come out. So it's like having a phobia for a butterfly. There's no logical reason, and you say to yourself, how can I be afraid of a butterfly? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'll be calm when I see a butterfly. And then the butterfly flies past, and then now phobia is different to fear. You're completely irrational. You're running like a person. And later on, when you're feeling safe, you then go, I can't believe I did that again. Okay, so that tells us that there's another part of our brain that's deciding how we're going to behave in front of the trigger that has no conscious control. And that part of our brain we call nowadays the reptilian brain. Right? So think of it as the hard drive of the brain, where all these things are stored, and this is the logical part. Okay, so logic here, reptilian brain here. What we learn from that is there's a part of our brain that's deciding what we're going to think, feel, and do, and we can measure this, about 1/3 of a second before our conscious mind finds out. By the time we find out, we have to learn how to manage that. It's too late to stop the brain producing it, and the eating is like that. There's a trigger, there's an impulse that shoots out, and you're eating, and then before you know it, you've eaten all the stuff inside, and then you feel terrible.
Yeah.
Right.
So this segues us then into emotional eating, right? Which a lot of people use eating as an emotional coping mechanism.
Correct.
Talk to us about that, because I think a lot of us still don't understand emotional eating.
So your brain had to learn that food makes me feel better when I'm feeling scared, fearful, angry, or upset. Okay, the brain has to learn that. And then certain foods obviously give you that dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And then that pattern becomes let's call it a software package. It becomes a software pattern that then keeps you locked into that.
I want us to also touch on the mindfulness techniques, right? And how some of those can be recommended in order to manage not just obesity, but also, I guess, manage the triggers that ultimately will lead to this kind of behavior.
Right. So mindfulness and all of those other techniques are what we call management techniques. Okay. The brain produces the impulse to eat or do what you do. Then mindfulness helps you to manage it. What we want to do these days is not get your brain to produce that in the first place.
Okay.
So if your brain's no longer responding to the trigger, there's no management required. You can actually then do different things. What we want these days is not manage, just change the software. And I'm making it sound simple, but it is, right? It's just, there are ways to go about it. So we'd layer it. Let's first get in there and sort out all the early traumas. And that's not hard to do these days, right? With BWRT, one can do that quite quickly. Because remember, once the trauma is downloaded, okay, you download the feelings at the time it happened. And those things never get old in your brain. Okay, so it's like a YouTube video. When something bad happens, your brain downloads what's happening. Your brain downloads what you're feeling and thinking. Then the brain turns that into a YouTube video for easy storage, and then the problem begins. That then becomes a software package. So when anything in that video triggers, your brain produces the feelings, and if you had learned that food takes the feelings away, that's what you do. Okay, so now can you see the cycle, right? I'm triggered. There's a certain person that walked past me. That's the person that sexually abused me, or he looks like that. I get the feelings, and then I eat quickly. And then before I know it, I've eaten the whole, but I'm still feeling bad, so now I eat more. in the hope. So it's almost addictive sometimes, as like cocaine and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is to first change those early traumas in the brain, because if we can change that, then the brain doesn't produce the feeling. If the brain doesn't produce the feeling, you don't need to eat.
Yeah. I mean, I feel, like this conversation really could take up our entire afternoon.
Good.
Because there's so many layers to this conversation around the psychology of obesity. But for today, unfortunately, we have to leave it here. Thank you so much for your time and for coming through to Afternoon Express.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
What an impactful discussion, providing valuable insights into the emotional side of obesity. Remember, the mind plays a crucial role in your health journey.